And I'm going to go back to finish this up to the section of the book that we started at. And that is this account from Major Reno, who we know a little bit more about now. But I think that the way he wraps it up, and they actually did a massive trial, a big trial for Reno. And they found that the actions that he took were not negligent. He might have made some calls that might not have been the best tactical calls if you look back on it. But he was basically cleared of any wrongdoing. Clearly, I think it's pretty clear that Windolf thinks, he broke. And he lost control of his troops. And then Benteen kind of took over and got things squared away. Okay. Clearly Windolf was also a huge fan of Benteen, so he might be spinning that story a little bit in that direction. But I do think that Reno, I think that him looking back on the incident, and he kind of wraps up his assessment of what happened and what went wrong that day. And also, I think, for lack of a better word, that there's a warning of sorts in this. So here's Reno. After much reflection, I've concluded that several great blunders were the direct causes of the Custer massacre. It is an established fact that Custer disobeyed the orders of the general in command of the expedition, for instead of waiting to meet General Gibbon and General Terry on June 26 at the Rosebud and then cooperate with them in their concerted plan of action as he had been directed, as soon as he struck the trail of the Indians, he followed it until he came upon the Indian village June 25th. Then, without attempting to communicate with either Terry or Gibbon, and without taking the trouble to ascertain the strength or positions of the Indians, he divided his regiment into 3 separate battalions, an act which nothing can justify, and dashed against the Indians, thus recklessly driving his own and my commands into an ambuscade of 5,000 Sioux. Nor did Custer take into consideration the unfed and exhausted conditions of the men and his horses, and he entirely ignored the fact that the Indians were qui vive and ready for the attack at noon, whereas it would have been an easy matter to surprise them very early in the morning. The only explanation for such conduct on the part of so brilliant an officer as Custer undoubtedly was otherwise was his great personal ambition. He had thought himself partially disgraced because he had been superseded in command of the expedition by General Terry, and it was well known that he was resolved, if possible, to carry off all the honors of the campaign. For, being in command of the only cavalry regiment attached to the expedition, he knew the brunt of the fighting would necessarily fall on him, and he made it no secret of his intention to cut loose from Terry where there was fighting to be done, and to carry on the campaign on his own hook. Absolutely insensible to fear, he was so reckless and daring in the extreme, and driven by an intense desire to distinguish himself by some brilliant exploit, he made his headlong dash to a horrible death, without the most causal regard for the maxims of military prudence. Even now, after the lapse of nearly 10 years, the horror of Custer's battlefield is still vividly before me. And the harrowing sight of those mutilated and decomposing bodies crowning the heights on which poor Custer fell will linger in my memory till death. And I think that's a pretty clear warning.